Hey everybody, welcome to Expedition 44. We've got a special episode for you today. We're really excited to have Dr. Lisa Compton on and Taylor Peterson. Patterson. Uh, we're really excited to talk about their new book today, Skills for Safeguarding. So, welcome to the show. We're going to give some opportunity for both of you to introduce yourselves a little bit to our audience. So, we'll start with Dr. Lisa. Tell us a little bit about you and kind of your background and your passion about this topic of your book.
Sure. So I have been a licensed clinical social worker for almost 30 years. So I have a lot of clinical practice and specialize in trauma treatment. And I am head of the PhD program at Regent University in counselor education.
And Taylor.
Yeah, I'm Taylor Patterson. I got my master's in counseling from Reformed Theological Seminary and then worked for several years after that at a nonprofit agency that serves survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. We have since left Jackson, Mississippi, where I was going to school and working, and I'm now work mostly with like adult survivors of childhood trauma. So, like Lisa mentioned, trauma is my niche, which will hopefully demystify the trauma word later in our conversation. But I am also now a faculty member at Regent University alongside Lisa.
Great. We're really excited to have both of you on the show and this conversation because I think it's super pertinent to the church and safeguarding, I guess, these practices in which is super impactful for ministry and the body of Christ. So I'm going to kick it over to Ryan. He's going to begin some of our interview questions with you, and yeah, again, excited to have this conversation with you both.
I think I'll start out that when I was in high school, I was involved with a pretty good sized church, and we went through over my critical years in high school, couple years in college, we went through four senior pastors in 5 years and five youth pastors in 3 years, to the point where they said, we're not going to hire another youth pastor for a while. And when you look at the reasons why they made those choices, or what happened, I would say your book pretty much hits it on the head without going into a lot of
Yeah.
detail. It's a huge problem today. I mean, this is just rampant in the news. We hear of abuse in church nearly weekly. And I mean, if we were going to write the stories, I mean, just one after the other. So in one way, I want to ask what made you write this book? Describe your experience. You're both mental health professionals, abuse, trauma, things like that. Can you just describe the why behind it, the process through it, and maybe what motivated the topics, the contributors, things like that?
This is my favorite question to answer because it is a little bit of a funny story. So we run a study abroad program to Italy each year, and in that program, we speak at a university that has a safeguarding program in Rome. And Dr. Rinaldi is the head of that program and amazing. And so one year I was speaking, and she and another faculty member said to me, there's no book anywhere on the topic of how to do safeguarding. And
Mm.
I was like, well, that's interesting. I would think that this has been written about. And they said, no, would you write it? Because I had written one on trauma prior. And so at that time, Taylor was my teaching assistant, and she had the unfortunate experience of sitting next to me on a 10-hour flight. And so I had her captive, and I was like, you want to do this? And she said yes. And so on napkins and scratches of paper, we took the whole 10 hours to start outlining the book. And we're very excited because, again, we come more from the mental health world. And so this was a great opportunity to use some of our trauma knowledge, but also put together a team of about 20 trauma experts to pool and people in ministry to pool some of these topics.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I was not a hostage in this book project by any means, because I think to Will, your experience of this like cycle of leaders in the local church, we hear the big stories of people in these large mega churches having learning of these major situations of abuse in the news. But then there's this microcosm of things happening in local churches where everyday congregants, faithful congregants of churches, are experiencing this harm and are confused and feel betrayed by leadership. And I see those clients in my practice. Like, I have clients weekly who have either personally experienced harm by a spiritual leader, or their congregation is going through one of those transitions that you described. And so this was a story that, again, hits close to me, not just because of big national news, but also what I see in my community.
I was really something you said also triggered something in that, you were saying like nowadays it's a really big problem. And I think that it's always been a problem. I think that the exciting thing is that nowadays it's coming to light and there's more of a
Mhm.
platform for people to share their stories. So with all the pros and cons of social media, it's really the journalists that initially brought this topic to the forefront, with the Catholic Church and the Boston Globe. And
Yeah.
then from there, now survivors of trauma and abuse are sharing their stories, and people have more platform to get the word out. And so it's a time where I don't know that trauma and abuse is on the rise. I think it's more a time where it's being brought to light. And
Yeah.
now there's accountability and people are talking about it and taking steps to address it.
It's so true. Matt and I started a very organic grassroots church movement called Tov, the Hebrew word for good, a few years ago, and it's very first century church, not really what you'd expect or experience today. It's outside, bonfires, outdoor stage. So it seems very different than what most people experience, and it's very very much driven by down to earth Bible studies, but a lot of testimony. And when we first started it, like, I think anytime a church starts, they end up getting people that have left other churches for various reasons, and we'd have these testimony nights, and I am not kidding, like every testimony was why they left some church because of abuse or need for healing or something like that. And it was just one after the other, after the other, after the other. So, tongue in cheek, when I read your book, I kind of said to Matt, where was this 2 years ago when we really needed it, But still, I'm glad you've brought it out, and I've already ordered several copies to send to some of these people that shared their testimonies.
Oh, neat. Yeah, that means a lot just from the like, so much went into this text. All our contributors' hard work and years of expertise went into this for that purpose of the, like, how do we both attune to those who are suffering and then also build cultures in which we can prevent future suffering.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our emphasis is really on skill building. So we are not trying to take down the church. We're not trying to take down pastors. Our goal is to equip. So for people that are leaders in ministry, how do I do this? How do I attend to power differentials, and how do I what do I do when people bring these stories of abuse to me? And then for people in the congregation that may not have leadership positions, but what can they do? So I think that that was really our angle here, is that this is a book to train people, to equip them, to give them the skills, as opposed to pointing out the problem and just leaving it at that.
Mm.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I felt that through reading the book as well. Um, you use throughout the book 5 words really to kind of encompass your practice, to look, listen, equip, um, and speak out. Sorry, look, listen, equip, speak out. Yep. And can you maybe help us maybe kind of understand your process of working through those and how it applies to, I guess, the big scope of your work here, and how you hope to empower churches to have these safeguards in place?
I think one
Yeah.
of our challenges at first was, what is safeguarding?
Hmm.
So I think we throw this term around, and it was, how do we define it in a way that is all encompassing? Because it really does include so many different elements. So we want people to look to recognize the impact of trauma and the signs. We want people to be able to listen to the stories of people that have experienced all forms of trauma, whether it's abuse in the church or other, to become better listeners. And how do we do that? How do we really convey compassion, and without having to decide, oh, is this true? Is it not? Where I think some people get hung up on judge and jury, but how to listen compassionately. And then, as I mentioned before, with the skill building, to equip churches, schools, congregants, everyone can be a safeguarder. And so, how do we reach all these different stakeholders and populations with skills? And then finally, the need to speak out. And there is a power differential in the churches, and it is important that everyone has a voice. And if enough of us speak out against abuse, speak out against trauma, and speak up for healthy listening, healthy choices, healthy habits in the church, and how to manage power well, then I think we'll see a shift in culture.
Yeah, the one piece I'll add to that is we there's a few like really excellent resources on church policy related to safeguarding. Like how many volunteers should take a child to the bathroom is always the example I give, type policy questions. And that's not really the resource that one we're equipped to give. That's not our like training and background. But also we wanted to, the policies are really important. And we also wanted to give this scope of safeguarding as culture change within the church, not just policy change within the church.
Mm.
So many people often read the Bible and they read it as if everything was kind of got like a stamp of God's approval over it. And most of our watchers, listeners, they don't read the Bible like that. But I think the general public does, and that can be very problematic theologically. I'm teaching a class on interpretation right now, and this is your first class in the master's program, and it just blows people away. I mean, it just rocks their world of like they've been reading the Bible a certain way their whole life, which isn't really very faithful, and then all of a sudden they take this class, and it just changes their perspective on everything. And we had Dr. John Walton on the show, who's also an IVP author, talking about David a while back. And a lot of people have put David on this huge pedestal, and it becomes very problematic when you read the stories. And you guys spend part of your book talking about Nathan in scripture as the safeguarder who exposed and rebuked David's abusive actions towards Uriah and Bathsheba. But you can also, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in the life of David that you could pull out of there. And I've joked about this a little bit. I want to be careful here because there's a lot about David I love. Matt sings songs. I am not a singer, but I psalm with him regularly. I have no problem doing some Hebrew chanting and everything else. And it's almost always psalms, usually that David wrote to do that. And so I have a great place for his work. But if he were here today, I would never leave my kids in the same room with him, to be quite frank. And so, um, tell me a little bit about your interpretation, the narrative, your explorations with that, and then how that affects us today.
Yeah, so one, just I'm thinking about my like first hermeneutics class when I just started seminary and that like kind of mind-blowing lens changing experience. So I'm grateful that you're still
Yeah,
planning to have that. But yeah, so one I'm not teaching a hermeneutics class, so forgive me for any gaps in that. But the story of David and Bathsheba that I was taught growing up was that Bathsheba was this seductress. And she like lured David in and like poor David. I mean, what's a guy to do? Guys are visual creatures, and so, just draw her in and um who could resist kind of lens on it. And um, as I've grown and been taught more maybe faithful to the text interpretations, that's not what was happening here.
right.
I,
This was an abuse of power on David's part, and an extreme abuse of power on
Hmm.
David's part. And so his abuse of power with Bathsheba, and then all of these cascading choices to cover up his sin. And so we talk about that in the book in the context of safeguarding, that it's not just the abusive act itself, but then all of these cascading efforts that the church might do to cover up the abusive act.
Yeah.
And we also name the courage of Nathan. David has already shown that he will go to great lengths to cover up his sin. And so it costs Nathan something to confront David and his sin. And that's kind of what we're charging our audience to do, that this is a role that might cost you something, but it's important in our faithful obedience to God and care for the vulnerable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we see it in so many of the like church abuse scandals. I
Yeah.
mean, the gaslighting of women who have come out. I mean, I think of Willow Creek. I think of all the others. Like Scott McKnight wrote on a whole bunch of that in his book, Church Called Tove. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, Dr. Lisa, do you have any more to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add two things. First, I think it comes down to image management, and that's where we see a lot of these problems come up. That the priority is in protecting the system at all costs, protecting closing ranks amongst the leaders. And it sounds good because it's well for the sake of the gospel, and we don't want people to fall away if they knew this. But God's a God of truth. And without truth, there is no safety. So I think that's part of it. Also, as we're talking about theology, there is a weaponizing of scripture that can occur in churches that are doing unsafe practices as well. And so things that maybe are pulled from the Bible in a theologically appropriate way can then get misused. So the concept of unity, for example, that are we called to be united as a body? Yes. But that then can be used in a way to silence people that are speaking up and out. I met with some other students this morning, and so many of them were sharing stories about how the leaders would say, feel free to give me feedback, and then as feedback would come, as questions would come, things were shut down, and people bringing the feedback were then ostracized and really excluded eventually. So I think there's things like forgiveness. There's other theology like the sufficiency of scripture, being faithful over service. So all of these things that we see in the Bible are good and healthy, and God meant them for good. But then they can be utilized for wicked purposes, and they can be used in manipulation.
Yeah. Sure. In the second section of your book, you focus on abuse systems, so the dynamics and its origins. The first chapter really focuses on the systematic clergy child abuse within the Catholic Church and the subsequent widespread cover up of that. And then the authors consider abuse and its systems throughout that. So, what ramifications does this have on shepherding and teaching and the influence of the church?
I think for me, seeing the church as a system was something new, admittedly. I've even worked on staff before, and looking at it from a systems lens really changed things. As I studied for the book instances among the Boy Scouts, you say gymnastics, military, these other closed systems, I had never considered the church as another closed system. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized, wow, this is something that has a centralized power. There's the potential for again closing ranks, and so that systematic lens I think is something that we really wanted to highlight. I think the authors of that chapter did an amazing job pointing out some of these patterns that can happen within systems, and especially particularly within closed systems that tend to self-monitor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to make sure. I'm trying to think before my counseling degree, when I heard systems, what would have come to mind? And I don't really remember what would have come to mind. So I want to describe what we mean by that. And so I think my natural lens, probably as a Western American person, is to think pretty individual.
think
Well,
in the past.
interacting within, oh, can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Well, okay, individualistically, I can think I am alone exercising agency in my world. But when I think about systems, I think that there's these like groups of people, like many individuals in dynamic relationship with one another, with particular like rules and dynamics of relating to one another. And so when we talk about systems and systems within the church, there's these particular rules of relationship that may be explicit, may be implicit, that really govern the way that people engage with one another. And I think it's important to name because we can be so individualistic in our perception of things. And we exist in communities that form and shape us, which is important when we think about safeguarding and the roles of leaders in shaping that culture and setting the tone for that.
That's
Mhm.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
As
think
we
there's
continue to read
systems
this
with.
book, oh, go ahead, Dr. Lisa.
No, I was just going to add even that there's systems within the system. So
Yeah.
you have the system of the pastoral staff, you have the system of the staff at large, you have the system of the congregants, you have the system of the community. And there are different rules and structures within each of those, and they all interact in different ways. And so when we're addressing, well, what's the answer, what to do? I think you have
Right.
to look at how all those systems interact with each other as well.
Hmm.
That's a good point. Third section of the book focuses on impacts of abuse. One chapter kind of goes with the growing body of research of trauma. Second one discusses vulnerability of abuse survivors, and the third focuses on child and adolescent survivors. We just got done. Well, Matt didn't do this one with me, although he's done a lot of these weekends. But I just got done doing a what we call renewal retreat weekend. The men are separate from the women, and so we bring the men on a 3-day weekend, and then the weekend after the women come on. And my wife works with this program too. And I will have to say that the great majority of the people that come on this weekend are being held back from their ministry potential because of something that happened in the church, or from a leadership perspective, or in their home, abuse, trauma related, that they just cannot let go of. And the amount that it holds them back is just unreal. I mean, it's like it just keeps them from even minimally functioning in ministry. And then they wonder why, over 20 years, they just can't get past that. And so on this weekend, a large part of it is bringing them to the place of healing and shepherding to kind of walking through it. And we've had several healthcare professionals be involved with this over the weekend. And a huge goal is to bring them to a place where they can, you know, get rid of those thoughts and move on. And the fruit after these weekends is just unbelievable. I mean, when people finally process through this and truly like are healed from a spiritual basis of the Lord, and for 20 years they've been sitting on a pew and really haven't made very many useful contributions to the kingdom, and then all of a sudden this happens and it's unreal. I mean, like they're off doing all this stuff, and you just look at them and you go, it's amazing. And so I read this chapter and I was just thinking over and over and over of how can we implement some of these findings into that program.
Mhm. Yeah, well, so there's so many parts to what you just described that I think are relevant to what we're talking about. One, trauma is pervasive. And so when we talk about trauma, again, I mentioned earlier, it has a kind of big, scary clinical feeling to it. And so
Yep.
I like to maybe bring it down a little bit into like, these are the consequences of the fall in the way that we experience it in our whole being. And so, because of the cascading consequences of the fall, people are severely and profoundly harmed in their relationships with other people in a way that
Yep.
impacts their body, their mood, their spirituality. And so it's deep suffering and kind of these long-term consequences of deep suffering, like you described. And so one of our primary goals of the book, and something that feels really important to me, having worked with so many trauma survivors, is that all the readers leave reading this text with a deeper love and compassion for the trauma survivor, because trauma responses can look haywire. Like we
Yeah.
talk about anger outbursts, substance abuse, self-harm, like all of these things that can seem really confusing and potentially frustrating to people who don't
Yeah.
quite understand it. And so we want to one, grow our compassion and for people who have suffered so profoundly that it impacts them in this way, and then also give skills for how do we patiently walk alongside. Now, not doing trauma counseling, but how do we one tolerate what goes on in us when we hear terrible hard stories, and then settle that enough that we can be
Yeah.
like patient stewards of other people's stories.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because none of us get through childhood unscathed.
Mhm.
And so we're not just talking about the big major traumas in terms of we know abuse and violence and those type of things, but humiliation,
Yeah.
neglect, not getting our needs met. There are a lot of things that are traumatic, and this isn't just psychological. This impacts the way our brain is formed during childhood. So the earlier the experiences, the more likely they are to impact the actual physical organ of our brain.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes in church circles, we can acknowledge other organs. Like if somebody has a problem with their pancreas, well, let's attend to that right away, go to the doctor, work on it. But when it comes down more to matters of the brain and the heart, I think those can be dismissed, even though, like you were mentioning, we're three-part beings. Body, soul, and spirit interact in profound ways.
Yeah.
So being able to engage with our stories and understand how our past can influence us, not in a way that we get stuck in the past, but in a way that we're able to connect some of the dots. And I know
Hmm.
for me, even 30 years as a therapist, there's still things from my childhood that may not be considered really big T traumas as some people would categorize them, but there are some things that have influenced the way that my brain functions. And I like to share this story because maybe it'll illustrate it a little bit for your listeners. But I was really rushed during childhood. My family was always in a hurry to the point where if you were late, it was considered murder. And I say that laughing, but it is 100% true. And so that wrote certain patterns on my brain. And
Taylor told us that before you
did she
logged
tell
on.
that
Not
She said
story?
exactly.
she
Yes.
You
logged
weren't
on
on
So
and she
yet,
said
and I
she will
said
be
she's
on time. I
punctual.
guarantee that.
yes. So what you can't see is that I have makeup across my chin because I was walking along the street and the light was turning. It was at 19 seconds for a walk. I was not in a rush. There was nowhere to go. And for some reason, my 53-year-old body took off running, fell, cut my face open, stitches, the whole thing. And all I can tell you is that something from my early childhood rose up and just told me to hurry up, to run. And this isn't something cognitively like in my conscience that happened. And so it's really engaging with our stories, with our past, not in a way to necessarily place blame, although sometimes that's appropriate when there is a perpetrator, but in a way to say like, okay, where am I at right now? What are some of the things that have contributed? Connect the dots and then be able to work on our stuff. And I think
Yeah.
one of your weekends, like you described, is a great way to start. I know for me, it's ongoing. Like some of these things are ingrained, and it is the daily grind of making sure that that is not that I'm living intentionally, not being driven by those past impulses.
Yeah. I think you hit it on the head too, is that there's often extra help that's needed. I mean, this weekend is kind of like the what I call the first step, but everybody gets connected to, kind of a Jesus version of a recovery program. And, we get them connected there. And there's a little in the men's group, there's like a band of brothers, and they keep going in, accountability programs and things like that for a year. And that is a lot of, the beautiful part of it. But then there's also sometimes people that have never been to, gotten professional help before, and now they're seeking Bible-based professional help on that. And it's amazing how when you do those things in like a course of a year, like I said, the fruit is just immeasurable. I mean, people's lives are totally changed. And so then that leaves me looking backwards and seeing people or coming in contact with people going like, you don't even know that you're sick, sort of, like you would be amazing if you could get past this. And some people won't come to these weekends that we have, or won't come to our Tove group, or whatever. And I really like, one of my prayers is that through writing a book like this, hopefully I can hand a book to them. And that's kind of what I said I did, and get them to at least get to these first steps that we're looking for.
Yeah, well, and
Hey,
the thing, sorry, Lisa. One, I think these weekends sound really, and like the programs after sound like really beautiful because it puts people in community, and so much of our healing happens in relationships. We had a
Yeah.
professor who would say we're harmed in relationship and we're healed in relationship. So it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And I want to say, like, particularly for those who are in leadership positions in ministry, it's not even necessarily that it just like unlocks all of this like fruitfulness. You might be externally fruitful in some ways. Like we see this with a lot of these big church pastors who are
Yeah.
thing that it also disrupts your relationships. Oh, it says connections unstable, so I hope you can still hear me. But it disrupts relationships behind the scenes. And so this can like really, really inform the way that we react to people when we feel insecure or incompetent or like people are abandoning us in relationship. And maybe we're able to like complete all of these good works, but the way that we're relating to others is showing up in this big and profound way. And then the second thing I want to say in response to people's maybe hesitance to do things like um, this work is hard and it's
Mm.
really, really terrifying. Like I so admire the courage of my clients to come into a counseling room and talk about the worst things that have ever happened to them.
Yeah.
Like that is terrifying. And so much of their life is built around how to try to keep these overwhelming emotions contained. And the thought of engaging in something like this feels like it's opening up Pandora's box of all of these
Yeah.
emotions that we don't know we can handle. And so one, I have a lot of compassion for those friends of yours who are feeling slow to lean.
I think she froze again, so I'll jump in
Can you hear me
here.
now? Yes,
Uh,
we need a lot of
yeah,
safety, is all I said at the end. Yeah.
yes, yeah. I think that not everyone's ready. And that's something that, trauma takes away people's control and sense of agency. And so, as helpers, we don't want to do the same thing. And so, I have to catch myself, even though I want so badly for somebody to start their healing journey and keep on going. I have to be careful not to overrun their sense of agency, that they just may not be ready. And I recognize as a trauma person, I recognize things such as addictions as ways that people are trying to manage their pain and
Yeah.
regulate.
Yeah.
And and so it's not that these things are okay and healthy, but it's understanding that this is a coping mechanism. And so if they come into a church and the church is like, well, you need to stop drinking, you need to stop this, you need to stop that, and now you need to tell us all of your deep, dark troubles, and you need to just like that's it's a lot. And so
Yeah.
people are going to be at different places in that healing journey. And I think being able to provide them the resources and support while also respecting their agency and they're the ones that have control over their lives. And it's the opposite of unsafe churches, where unsafe churches are telling everyone what to do and telling them that they need to submit to the authority and do this and that. And by respecting where people are in the journey and recognizing this can take time,
Yes.
especially the adversity that happened early in childhood. There are coping mechanisms that had to be put in place for that child's brain to feel like they could survive. And so it can take a while to work
Yeah.
through. Mhm.
So much of this that you guys are saying is just excellent stuff, that it took us 15 years to learn a lot of this stuff, that if we would have just had this book 15 years ago, it would have saved us a lot of time and aggravation. But now, like, one of our lines when they first come is this is very difficult. What we're asking you to transparently do is going to be the hardest thing that you've ever had to do. But after this weekend, you are going to sense a freedom that you have never had before. And we have to convince people of that, and usually it takes at least 24 to 48 hours of this weekend before they can bring themselves to a place where they're willing to do that. And this is the most comfortable room you've ever been in, the most supportive room. And I hate to say it, but I don't think a lot of places that people sometimes turn to, which I hate to admit is sometimes your evangelical church, understands a lot of these dynamics. They're kind of doing things the opposite perhaps of what they should be, and they're having adverse effects on it. And so, Jesus, what do we learn from him is this retreat that we do. It is just it's the most incredible outpouring of love and grace that you've ever understood. And that's the number one thing when people give testimonies when they leave, is they've never felt this kind of love and grace before. And with trauma, abuse, all of this stuff, and not everybody that comes on these has those similar issues. Sometimes they're very simple, but they're things that have been locked away in the past, and this and that, and it's kind of kept them from getting by. But boy, there's just so many morsels that you guys are talking about that are excellent and need to be integrated in church. And like you alluded to earlier, like, I believe that starts with the better theology. And so Matt and I talk a lot about shepherding and grooming, and how, these are sort of contronyms or opposites in the Bible. Matt, do you want to kind of jump into that, talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, actually, our church has done a bit of work on this, especially kind of in the sex trafficking area of that. I mean, I'll brag on them for a little bit. Last February, we did, or before that actually, because the Super Bowl's in February. Our church did was worked with an organization called SOAP, which does a lot of work in basically against grooming children, and about actually like releasing people from sex trafficking. Our church packaged makeup wipes and soap and that to go into all the hotels around the Super Bowl. We packaged like something around 10,000 or more of these, and they got distributed out of the hotels. And I think four people got freed from sex trafficking because of it. So it was pretty awesome. So our church is it's something our church is really involved with, but it's something that also is like near and dear to my heart, having three daughters and a son. And I know Ryan has four boys that we're very careful with our our kids and who they associate with, and that. And so talk to us a little bit about grooming and how pastors, shepherds, even like congregations can have these safeguards in place when it comes to grooming and trafficking and all that sort of stuff.
And let me jump in here real quick before you guys start there. Matt used to live in Wisconsin, where I'm from, and he recently moved to Indiana, to the church that he's talking about called The Point. But I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but Milwaukee is one of the huge hubs for human trafficking. And so this part of the conversation, I mean, our listeners come from all over the place, but a large contingency of them are Wisconsin, and it's going to hit very close to home.
Yeah. Well, I'll speak. Jackson, Mississippi, where I was living, is also a place with a lot of trafficking. One, because it's a place with a lot of poverty, but also intersections of interstates usually also kind of have a high correlation. So I'll give a quick, and this will there'll be overlap in these things, because people who are vulnerable to trafficking are also the people who are vulnerable in our church. A lot of those risk factors kind of coincide, that
Yeah.
poverty, childhood trauma, um, any kind of intellectual or developmental disabilities, all kind of like increase a person's risk factors for being um, exploited. And
Yeah.
so something for communities to be in mind, like have in mind, that building resources and supports around vulnerable populations helps prevent those types of harm. But specific to grooming in the church, one of the things that was important to us to highlight in the book is the aspect of grooming the environment. That it's not just the grooming of the individual victim, which I think we hear more about, but there's also this sense of building a reputation among the community where, oh gosh, John would never. He is like the first to volunteer for all things. He offers rides to everybody. He's like, we all think John's great. Yeah, sure. He's like stood a little too close to me a few times, but like it's all well intentioned. It's good. Like there's this sense of um building the kind of reputation where if one of these people in a vulnerable population, maybe the promiscuous teenager or the single mom without resources, makes an accusation against John, we think, well, John's great. And this person is like a little more shady. And it creates that, widens the power differential between the perpetrator and the victim. And one of
Mm,
the things I do these safeguarding trainings at my church, and when we talk about grooming the environment, I typically get some question from a member of the training who says, well, does this mean that like every nice guy is going to be accused of being a perpetrator? That like, can I be nice without like looking like I'm grooming? Yeah, it feels like kind of scary. And the line that I always give is that when the Bible talks about wolves in sheep's clothing, it's not saying, hey, sheep, be scared that you're going to be perceived as a wolf. It's saying that when someone is identified as a wolf, we can't say, oh, they look like a sheep, so they're probably fine. Like, the Bible's telling us that there will be people who are wicked who look like the rest of us. And,
yeah,
and so we need to be attuned to that someone's particular good reputation doesn't necessarily mean that these accusations against them are false.
great point.
Good point.
We have heard so many times, well, they can't be possible. He's a Christian,
Hmm.
right? That no, they serve so much. They're tithers. I know them. It always strikes me that memory of the 9/11 hijackers, and their neighbor was interviewed and said of one of them, he's the nicest guy. There's no way he could have done this. And so remembering that there are some perpetrators that intentionally groom individuals and the environment. And if I were going to go harm, the first thing I would do is start serving. I'd do parking lot ministry. I'd sign up for everything. I'd make sure they knew I was giving. I would be the go-to person for service. And like Taylor was saying, create this reputation. So we have to stop looking at, well, this person has these religious beliefs or these behaviors, therefore they could never have done this. Because
Mm,
unfortunately, we know that that's not true. Sometimes it's the very
right,
tactic that they use.
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I want to start bringing this down to a conclusion. Your fifth section focuses on skill development for safeguarders. Chapters after that look at empathy, listening, responding, emotional regulation, arousal and safeguarding, survivors. The last chapter, I think, was incredible. Complexities of informed consent, various relationships, professional boundaries, confidentiality, all of that stuff. Can you kind of touch on why that is so important? And as I think most of our listeners are definitely tied into interpreting this through the lens of a church, maybe talk through some red flags and, as your book really points out, safeguards. How can you keep this from happening right in front of you?
Yeah, I'll let Taylor cover the red flags. I think the first thing to know is it can be very overwhelming when you hear in the media how many churches have people that are being accused of abuse and committing abuse, and the problem seems overwhelming. And so the
It's
question,
almost every church. It's almost, I
yes,
mean, it's
yes,
like I said, it's in the news, but it's also local. I mean, I
yes,
hear this every church, almost every corner. Like in the last
yeah,
10 years, this has happened somewhere. It's
yeah.
so real.
Well, churches are made up of people, and so they are prone to coercion, manipulation, abuse, just like any other system. So
Mhm.
just because it's a church does not mean it's safe. And so there's a lot of talk now, which is wonderful, about what is safe. It should churches open up their financial books? We shouldn't be doing NDAs. Like there's a lot of things to cover in terms of what makes a church safe. But I think what we wanted to do is give people tools. Like what can I do? If
Yeah.
I'm a pastor, if I'm in the youth ministry. If I am just somebody that cares about people and loves God and wants to see the church be a healthier place, what can I do? So that's where the practical aspect comes in. And some of the things will be applicable for counselors, but most of it is across the board. What can the everyday person do? And so understanding how to show empathy, understanding how to have good boundaries. I think that we look at safety both internally and externally. So like you were describing the environment, like we're really working hard to create this supportive environment. And so showing people, what does that mean? Like what are the
Yeah.
practical, how do we create a safe environment? And then internally, you could create the most safe environment in the world, but if somebody isn't feeling safe internally because of their past, then that's something that you can't force that. Like, and so being patient, for example, if somebody on one of your weekends, by the end of the weekend, they still may not feel ready to share what
Yep.
happened. And a safe environment, that's okay. Like we are
Yeah.
here for however long it takes, whatever you need. And so that's where the that last half of the book is all about, what do I do? Like what's the
Yeah.
practical application, not necessarily all the policy writing. If I'm somebody in the church and somebody comes to me and tells me about an abuse story, what do I do next? Where do I turn? What is privacy and confidentiality when it's not in the context of a counseling relationship? So it's really the nitty-gritty details that we tried to cover.
Yeah. Yeah. We wanted,
So
oh, go ahead.
it's just gonna say it's so important. We had well, I had a situation. I was speaking at a little mini conference. And so we were in a large church that let us borrow their space. And it was a smaller group that came in to borrow their space. But there were several things happening at this church. And so while they were in this small space, and this is a group of maybe 75, 100 people, but their kids were there with them. And one of the kids went into one of the shared bathrooms, and that was there at another thing came in, and something happened there. And it changes your mindset of all of this stuff. Every time this small group is going to plan something now, this is going to be in their mindset. And then it comes to speak of, all right, we've got kids everywhere. This was also a group that was into reclaimed lives, and they had some people that might have had some pretty shady backgrounds, or might have rules to follow, so to speak, and everything else. And how do you handle that? Is there some kind of a public proclamation? Is there somebody that needs to shadow certain people, or keep an eye on them, or walk with them? And so after this happened, this group reached out to me and said, how should we handle this? And I wish I would have known you guys back then. I would have gotten you connected. I said, you need to get professional help, reach out and find people. I can speak some life to this, from a theological perspective, but you also need to go further with it. And I mean, it just seems like this is the reason I say this, is because it was a very normal everyday situation, and it's in this conversation is touching that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioning that highlights that, like, when we experience these things, it can make us like constantly on guard. Like, if I
Yeah.
can go to this normal everyday thing and something horrible happen, when can I ever be at rest? If I can
Yes.
experience this harm in the church that's supposed to be the most safe, the
Hmm.
most sacred, when can I ever be at rest? And,
You hit it right
one
on the head. That's exactly what it is.
yeah, it's so scary. And honestly, it's a reasonable fear. Like, I touch a hot stove and I learn I shouldn't touch hot stoves. But what if
Yeah.
everything feels like a hot stove? What do I do
Yeah.
then? And
Yeah.
so one of the things again, like when I do my safeguarding trainings, I talk about how I open it with this thought that we find ourselves maybe on two opposite ends of the spectrum, and your listeners probably do too, where on one end of the spectrum, you might be prone to think, gosh, this is also overblown. Like a few bad eggs, this hardly ever happens, like that perspective. On the other end of the spectrum, you probably have listeners who are in that kind of hyper vigilant, on guard, no one can be trusted,
Yeah.
disinformation sparking a lot of anxiety. And so I think, as a like maybe close to the like my thoughts, I know we're getting close to time, is how do we all find ourselves at midline where
Right.
we recognize this is a real problem, And there are tools and skills and things we can learn that can help us feel equipped to attune to that risk, and care well for the vulnerable among us. And so we don't want to be hyper anxious and hyper vigilant, but we also don't want to be dismissive. We have to strike some kind of balance.
Yeah, that's so good. So I guess how can we, I guess, take the next steps in this, as I mean, Ryan and I are pastors, or even, the everyday churchgoer, the everyday person, whether you're not going to church or whatever, and happen to stumble upon our channel. What are the next steps they can take in this?
Well, you're already doing one where you're starting the conversation. And so I think awareness is key. Talking to as many people as possible about how do we make the church safer? What is a safe church? This is something that I
Right.
was just challenging some of our students on. What is safety? What is a safe church? What are some practices that we have in churches right now that open us up to some vulnerabilities? And then talking about trauma, I think that trauma and abuse, and I think our church has come very far at the church at large in talking about mental health. So thank the Lord for that. Back when I was younger, nobody admitted that they were in counseling. We didn't talk, and the church was very. I remember that when I was starting out, I was at a church, and the pastor said, "We don't need Dr. Feelgood around here." And so I think we've made progress in understanding mental health, but I think that we're still shying away from the topic of trauma and abuse. Yet research shows us that over 70% of people have experienced trauma by the time they're 18.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so I think we need to engage with that, and we need to talk about what is it? What does it look like? What is the impact of trauma? And then equip each other, equip ourselves with skills to help, skills to address it. What can we do? We're not all going to go into professional counseling, but what can we do to be part of the solution and part of really compassionate care providers?
So a good first step is right here, right? Start with the book and see where that goes. How else can we keep in touch with you guys, track with you, things like that?
I'm not terribly social media present. I know that's not a thing authors should say, but I'm a counselor and educator first, and so yeah, so we have a website. I think Lisa,
Yeah.
skillsforsafeguarding.com.
Well,
We have email addresses and faculty. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
yeah. So the website's drlisacompton.com. And there's also an Instagram, which I do need to get better at using. Similar to Taylor, we are social media resistant. But everything's on drlisa.com, and you can find both of us there if you want to message and have questions or anything like that, or at the Instagram. It's at drlisa.com also. So website and Instagram are the same thing, and you can find us in those ways. And we just love being a part of training and spreading the word out there, and appreciate you all having us on. And we appreciate the listeners for staying engaged this whole time. It's not an easy topic to talk about. So thank you
Yeah.
to them for listening.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having this conversation with us. It's very important for the church, and we really appreciate your book. Encourage any pastors out there listening, anybody out there listening, to pick it up. We'll put a link in the show notes, and we'll also put a link to your website in the show notes when we post this episode. Again, thank you so much for your diligence in safeguarding the church and the resources that you both have given us in this book. And we just pray that the church will listen, and that we will embody Christ, and how he his kindness, his compassion, his safeguarding of his sheep, and that our churches would be a place where that is fostered. So thank you so much again for joining us, Dr. Lisa and Taylor. May God bless you and keep you.
Thank you.